It was the best of times, yet it was the worst of times. This is the sentiment of the members of the 8th Air Force. The best times being the patriotism, undying friendships, excitement, stopping Hitler, and providing the assurance of freedom for their loved ones. The worst times being the fatigue, the fighters, flak, extreme cold, boredom, loneliness, and losing your buddy. It is the story of everyone, a diverse group of young men who shared the brutal experience of war, a story that shaped world history. They were called the Mighty Eighth, and mighty they were. Mighty young and unexperienced, mighty motivated and intelligent, mighty far from home, mighty brave, yet at times mighty scared, and oh yes, mighty handsome. This is your story.
The 8th Air Force was activated at Savannah, Georgia in January 1942. In February, a tiny cadre of officers arrived in England to make arrangements for housing and bases for the groups to follow. Their first bombing mission was to Rouen, France in August. This was the first of 459 days on which heavy bombers struck enemy targets. The 8th Air Force grew to a formidable force of over 350,000 flying and ground personnel. The young men who flew the missions faced great difficulties from fierce enemy fighter attacks and from intense anti-aircraft fire. The ground personnel repaired almost 60,000 battle-damaged airplanes. They also linked and loaded over 99 million rounds of ammunition. However, the Mighty Eighth never once turned back, and along the way there were many heroes. There were 14 Medal of Honor recipients. Brave young men received 220 Distinguished Service Crosses, and 817 Silver Stars were awarded. There were thousands of Air Medals, Purple Hearts, and Bronze Stars. No attempt has been made or can be made to properly reflect in statistics the devotion to duty, heroism, and sacrifices made by these fine young men. We do know that over 26,000 men were killed in action. Another 25,000 had to abandon their crippled aircraft over enemy territory and became prisoners of the Nazis for the remainder of the war. As hard as it is to believe, the individuals who compiled these amazing numbers were just ordinary people. We know now, however, that they were truly extraordinary. Some of these exceptional fellows formed the Mississippi chapter of the 8th Air Force Historical Society. Their mission was to preserve the rich history of the Mighty Eighth, along with the resolution that their comrades did not die in vain and would not be forgotten. The mission to Savannah culminated in the dedication of a monument to their memory. It is time to hear from the Mississippians in the Mighty Eighth. Listen to their experiences, their contributions to the war effort, and be proud that they were there.
My name is Ernest J. Adcock. I like for my friends to call me Ernie. I was born in the little village of Ridgeland, Mississippi in 1922. I was inducted into the service in November of 1942. Went to Camp Shelby for processing from there, we were assigned to the Air Force, and I was sent to Keesler Air Force Base for basic training and airplane mechanic school. And we finished mechanic school and went to gunnery school at Laredo, Texas. And we stayed there for several weeks, graduated gunnery school, and went to Boise, Idaho for group assignments, which there we were assigned to B-24s, Liberators. And we were assigned to, with our other crew, we established our entire crew there. Took some training at Boise, and we went to Sioux City, Iowa, Mitchell, South Dakota, and Lincoln, Nebraska for further group training in the bombers. And from there, almost a year to the date, we flew to Morrison Field, West Palm Beach, Florida, and took off from there with our own ship, B-24 Liberator. And we flew by the way of Central America, South America, Africa, into England, and touched down at Tibenham, England, where we were assigned to the 445th Bomb Group, 700th Squadron. And that happens to be the same group that Jimmy Stewart, the famous movie actor, was in. We got to serve with him for several months until he left, went to another group. But we flew missions over Germany for 3 or 4 months, and on March 6, 1944, we were on the all-out raid of the 8th Air Force to Berlin. And we were on our way to the target when we lost an engine from mechanical problems. Couldn't feather the prop. And so much drag on the airplane that we had to drop out of formation. And about that time, a flak ball hit us in another engine and knocked it out. And we were struggling on 2 engines, just barely enough speed to keep alive and keep flying. And we were headed back to our base, and we hadn't gotten out of Germany when these 5 ME-109s spotted us, and we spotted them, I guess, about the same time. And they unloaded before they got close enough for us to do anything with our 50 caliber machine guns. And before we knew what hit us, we were on fire, losing altitude more. And the pilot gave the orders to bail out. So I was the bottom turret gunner, and I wheeled my turret around and got out into the waist section. Everybody was gone. Nobody was there but me. And so much smoke, I found my chute and strapped it on. Being in the turret where I was, you couldn't wear anything but your thin flying suit. So it's so crowded. But I found my chute, snapped it on, had nothing on but my flying suit, the little heated suit, not the big fleece line. And I saw the hatch, the bottom hatch in the plane was open, and nobody was there. So I dove out like I was diving into the Atlantic Ocean. No idea where I was going to land. But I pulled my ripcord after I counted to about 10. Fortunately, it opened perfectly. And landed in the snow. And saw this edge of the woods with a little group of trees. And I grabbed my chute, watered it up, and took off of this little ravine and jumped in and covered myself with the chute. And heard the noises all around me, that the dogs and and the civilians were looking for me, and I could see them, but they couldn't see me. So they finally gave up trying to find me and went about their business, and I waited there until dark. This was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I stayed there until dark, and I headed toward the moon was setting in the west, and I started following the moon, trying to get back to the, maybe run into some underground help, and but found none. The next morning there was really no place to hide, and this one German man was out on his porch that I passed by, and he motioned for me to come in, and he gave me something to eat and drink, and tried to talk to me in German, which I didn't understand any of it he said. So finally he said, "Come on and go with me." So I followed him up the street into this little German town, and he turned me into the German headquarters. So that's where I became a German prisoner of war. And we were shipped to Frankfurt for interrogation. From there, we were assigned to a Stalag Luft 6 up in Heidekrug, East Prussia, in Lithuania, up on the Baltic Sea. And we were interned there for almost a year. But we left there on a real crowded boat, cattle boat. We all herded in, about 2,000 of us into this boat. And it was a horrible situation. No food, nothing to drink for 2 days. Finally, we got to our destination, and they got us off the boat and ran us to the about 1.5 miles to the camp that we were going to, Stalag Luft 4. And we stayed there until about February of '45, and they herded us out on the road for walking. The Russians were closing in on us, and they were trying to keep us away from the Russians. So they, let's see, we walked till staying in barns, open fields, till May the 5th, 1945, when the British came through and liberated us. And we were sent back to our U.S. forces. And from there, we went back to England for a few days, and then they put us on the ship, transport ship, got us back to the U.S. One of the most important things, I think, that I remember mostly about my life was being shot down and being in prison for 14 months. And in the meantime, thinking more about my wife that I married on a furlough, Jean, back in September of 1943, when I was on a 7-day leave. We got married and spent 2 nights together, and I headed back to the base and then overseas.
My dearest darling, it seems like ages since I last wrote you, and it seems longer than that since you told me how much you love me. My sweetheart, you can't realize how much your love really does mean to me now. I don't know what I would do if I didn't have you. Jean, darling, I love you more than everything in the world. My dearest darling, in approximately 3 hours and 15 minutes, according to my time, we will be married exactly 1 year. Sweetheart, that's about all I have been thinking about today. What we would be doing and how beautiful you would look. In fact, those 2 things remain on my mind. I'm so very much in love with you, my darling. Don't worry about me. I'm getting along okay. Sweet darling, remember that I love you with all my heart and soul. All my love always, Ernest.
And that's the story of my service life.
My name is John L. Walker from Jackson, Mississippi. I flew with the 95th Bomb Group with the 8th Air Force, a 336 Bomb Squadron, heavy bombers, flying fortresses in 1944 out of England. But I started my Air Force career as a private. I enlisted in January of 1942, approximately 1 month after Pearl Harbor. I was not married and stayed on in Jackson there for a while, but we were sent to Camp Shelby for indoctrination, and then on down to Keesler Field in Mississippi for basic training. After finishing basic training, they assigned me to go to the Armorers School in Denver, Colorado, which I finished in about 8 weeks, and I beg pardon, about 12 weeks. And from there to Dayton, Ohio for a short stay, and that's when I took the written examination and qualified to be an aviation cadet, to either go to pilot training or navigator or bombardier training, whatever they thought best. But I was fortunate in that I was physically in good shape. My eye vision was 20/15, and I qualified for pilot training. And we went to Santa Ana, California to start our training there. Basic training for cadets is about 8 weeks. And so from December through January, I was in Southern California. After that, to Dayton, Ohio, where I was assigned to an air depot group as an armorer. And as I said, that's where I took the exam for cadet. After finishing basic, you might say, primary training as a cadet, non-flying, they sent us to Claiborne Flight Academy in Wickenburg, Arizona, which is just north of I'll get it in a minute. At any rate, we finished primary training there in the PT-13, the bi-wing Stearman, and then was sent on to Bakersfield, California for basic training in a BT-13. From there to Marfa, Texas for advanced training in the twin-engine Cessna C-78, or the Bamboo Bomber as it was commonly called. From there, I thought I was a hot pilot and ready to go on into combat or whatever that came up, but they decided I needed a little more training, and along with several other guys, they sent us to train in the B-17 school at Roswell, New Mexico. We spent about 8 weeks there in learning to fly the B-17 and all its little peculiarities. And then they sent a bunch of us to Salt Lake City, Utah, to a replacement depot, where we sat around and did nothing but check the bulletin board to see where we might be going next. They sent us from there to Tampa, Florida, where they assigned crew members to each pilot, and then on over to Avon Park, Florida, which is a small place right in the central part of Florida that was used to familiarize the crews with themselves as well as with the equipment that they had to use. We finished our course there about the latter part of May. I'd say it was probably around the 31st of May that we left there on a troop train headed north up towards Jacksonville, and from there on up to Savannah, Georgia. And of course, I didn't know at the time that that was the first assignment in the 8th Air Force, but it was. And from there, they assigned us a new airplane right off the factory assembly line that just had been checked out to make sure it was mechanically all right. And we flew that airplane to Bangor, Maine, nonstop from Florida, which was a pretty good flight in itself, but we'd had plenty of experience cross-country flying, night and day both. When we landed at Bangor, Maine, they issued us heavy Arctic flying equipment, fur-lined jackets, pants, boots, the whole bit. And we knew, of course, that we were going across the North Atlantic by that time. We took off from Bangor one morning, June the 1st, I believe it was, took off from Bangor, Maine, and flew to Gander, Newfoundland, which was one of the big jumping off spots for people going to the European Theater of Operations. We landed in Gander, Newfoundland that evening, and when we woke up the next morning, it was about 6 inches of snow on the ground. This was in June now. And with 6 inches of snow on the ground, they didn't have the snow plows set up to operate at that time, so we had to park ourselves there and wait. On my wife's birthday, June the 3rd, 6 inches of snow, and we were sitting there waiting for orders to proceed. June the 5th, 1944, we took off from Gander, Newfoundland, across the North Atlantic, and we could see the iceberg floating around down below us. I climbed up to 10,000 feet to make sure that if anything did go wrong, I'd have adequate time to make the necessary decision as what we were going to do. Anyhow, we flew on without incident across the North Atlantic, landed in North Ireland. Our navigator did an excellent job plotting our course, and we landed in North Ireland right on schedule. From there, they put us on a ship across the Irish Sea and into Scotland, and from there on a troop train to the 95th Bomb Group. When we got to the 95th Bomb Group, they assigned us a place to sleep and gave us orders that we would report the next morning for training. So we thought, here we go, more training. But it was well worthwhile. We had to learn how to use the life rafts to ditch the airplane and survive a ditching procedure. And also they wanted to be sure we knew how to fly formation, because that's the key to good bombing and good protection, is to have a good tight formation that can place all the bombs in a small area and to guard against enemy fighters coming in. The engineer, navigator, engineer, bombardier, all of those had 50 caliber machine guns, and they got an opportunity to try them out as to how much noise they made and how effective they were. But we flew about a 6-ship formation there for 2 or 3 days, and they finally decided we were safe to fly with, so they started assigning us to missions as they came up in no particular order that I knew about at the time. So our first mission was to Calais, France, where the buzz bombs were being launched towards London and creating a lot of destruction there, but not doing really any war damage to amount to anything. But the buzz bombs were somewhat of a menace, and bothered the ego a little bit, and the person who was listening to them fly, waiting for that engine to cut off, and then trying to figure out where they were going to hit. So we stayed in London on a 3-day pass for a while, for 3 days, and then went back to the base. And the next day we went on a mission, which was one of the heaviest targets in the European theater at that time. It was a big synthetic oil refinery and production plant by the name of Merseburg. And I think you can ask most any person who flew with the 8th Air Force about Merseburg, and they'll tell you it was something else. Well, the flak was so heavy on that mission that, as the saying went at the time, you could almost walk on the shrapnel or the clouds that was left when the shells exploded. So we survived that mission and went on, flew several more. Then they gave us another leave to go to London and kind of get unwound a little bit. They knew we were probably under a lot of tension after having flown a few missions. So they gave us a little time off to recuperate. We did that several times in the course of getting our 35 missions in, which was the required amount. The 8th Air Force started out requiring 25 missions, and because they had no fighter protection at all beyond the channel. But after the fighters, our American fighters, became more plentiful and experienced in combat, they were a lot of protection for us, as well as doing a lot of damage on the ground. And so at that time we were able to fly pretty much as we wanted to. The mission that I recall as much as anything was a mission to Stuttgart, which of course has a terrible name for flight crews of the 8th Air Force because of the heavy damage to the 8th Air Force and the number of planes shot down. But It didn't affect us insofar as the number of planes shot down, but in our particular plane it did, in that we suffered some battle damage there, knocked out one of the engines completely and ruined the turbo supercharger on another one, so that we were on very limited power. We had to leave the formation and fly out on our own, protect ourselves, and we finally managed to get back to American lines that Paris had just been liberated about 2 weeks before. So we landed at an airfield just outside Paris, which turned out to be Orly Airfield, one of the commercial airports in Paris. We spent several hours there wondering what we were going to do, and then a C-47 plane from our base in England showed up, and we climbed aboard and went back to England in it. We were afraid they were going to send all our clothes and things home, thinking we had been missing in action. But fortunately, we got back before they could do that. We flew on several more missions, and some of them were very severe as far as the amount of enemy resistance is concerned. And some of them were, as we call them, milk runs, with little or no enemy aircraft activity. We did finish our missions. All 10 of our crew finished their missions together, with the exception of the navigator. And he was unfortunate enough to had to have an appendectomy. So he missed 5 of our missions and had to make those up with another crew. But we finished our missions on December the 12th, 1944, having started flying on July the 5th. And we got our missions in a relatively short period of time. We did make one other unusual mission insofar as the 8th Air Force, having air superiority now, wanted to show the Germans that they had air superiority, and they made a deal with the Russians to where we could have an airfield over there to land on. So I was fortunate enough to get on one of those missions, and we flew from England across the northernmost part of Germany, bombed a target in that area, went on into Russia and landed at Poltava, Russia. We spent one night there and then went on down bombing a target in Austria on the way down to Italy. We landed on the plains of Foggia in Italy, and I promptly got on the field telephone there and located my brother, who was a ground crew engineer, and he and I had a family reunion right there in Foggia, Italy. We spent 2 days there, giving us time to enjoy some sunshine and bake up some heat and energy, and departed on the way back to England. We flew across southern France, bombed an airfield, and I don't think we saw but maybe 1 or 2 bursts of flak, and no enemy fighters on that run. As I said, we had air superiority at that time, and we're glad to get it. After getting back to England, we went back to our normal routine of flying about 1 mission out of 3, and finished up our missions, as I say, on December the 12th. I decided I wanted to try to get another promotion. I was first lieutenant, but I thought, well, there may be a chance to be promoted to captain, so I agreed to stay on over there in some administrative duties. But I found out pretty quick that that wasn't going to get me a promotion that I wanted, so I decided at that time that the best thing for me to do would be to go home and see my wife and little boy, who was 1 year old and wanted to see his daddy. I arrived back in New York, past the Statue of Liberty, and we disembarked. Queen Elizabeth was the ship we came home on. We flew an airplane over and came back on the Queen Elizabeth, but that gave us some good experience, and we enjoyed both ways, really. I sent my wife a telegram telling her that I was back on American soil and would contact her later on from Camp Shelby, which I did, and she and I had 2 weeks together, R&R, at Miami Beach, and enjoyed our stay there very much. They asked me at Miami Beach if I had any preference for flight duty, and I told them that I thought I could do some Air Transport Command, they called it at the time, what's now Military Air Transport Service, or MATS. but at that time it was Air Transport Command. And I was assigned to Air Transport Command and sent to Memphis, Tennessee, which was right in my front yard, you might say. I spent about 8 weeks there, and then they sent us to 8 weeks there learning to fly instruments a little better. And from there on over to Charleston, South Carolina, where we were checked out in C-54s, a 4-engine transport that was heavily used at that time by the Air Transport Command. And from there, then they sent, after I finished checking out on that C-54, we were sent to Sacramento, California. I then made one trip from Sacramento as a co-pilot to get checked out on the route and to let them know that I was capable of handling all the necessary chores on a flight of that type. We landed at Hickam Field, spent one night there, and the next morning they told us we were going back to the States with an aircraft load of men who had been prisoners of war of the Japanese for anywhere from 2 to 4 years, which of course was a terrible thing. And we felt real privileged to be able to help those guys, to take them on their last leg back towards the good old USA. When we got back then, turned those guys over to the medical detachment there and reported into the squadron office, and the squadron commander called me in and said, you have enough points if you want to get out, you can be released from active duty. I said, I'm ready to go home, and sent me to Barksdale Field at Shreveport, Louisiana, where I was released from active duty and given my walking papers and headed home all the way back to Jackson. Started in Jackson and finished up in Jackson, and was glad to be there. My father, who was a civilian worker at the Jackson Army Air Base in World War II, received an award for a monetary award for developing a heat treating process for aluminum, and showed a picture of him in the base newspaper and in the Jackson Daily News also, of him turning around buying a war bond in the name of his first grandson. So we enjoyed reading and hearing about that, and he was proud and we were too. All in all, I don't think I had a bad tour of duty with the Air Force, and I think sometimes I may have made a mistake in not staying on active duty full time, but I had to make a decision, and I did what I thought best at the time. Thank you very much.
My name is Kenneth Nail, and I was in the 457th Bomb Group, the 748th Squadron, and our base was Glatton, which was just about 10 miles south of Peterborough in England. I flew as the navigator on a B-17 crew, and I flew 13 missions with the crew that I went overseas with, and then they tabbed me as a lead navigator, and I flew the rest of my tour of 30 missions with various crews, whoever was in the lead in my squadron. I grew up in Grenada, Mississippi, and after graduating from high school there, I went to Millsaps College for a year and a half, and by then the war had begun, and I began to think about what I was going to do in the war, and I joined the aviation cadets. I had to go to Jackson for a physical and so on to join the cadets, and they put me in the cadet reserves, and with the idea that I might not be called up for a year, so I went home, got a job, and worked. And the company I was working for, a construction company that was building Army bases, sent me up to North Carolina, and we lived and we got married. My wife and I got married, and we moved up to Pinehurst, North Carolina, and we had just a lovely honeymoon place to live while we worked there. And a month later, I got my call to active duty. And went to basic training down at Miami Beach for a month or so, and then they sent all of this bunch that they couldn't wait to call in, sent us to college. And I went through a college period and at Ouachita College over at Arkadelphia, Arkansas, and then into actual cadets. And went to Maxwell Field for basic cadet training, pre-flight, and then to primary flight school down in Florida, where I did not succeed as a pilot and became what I should have been assigned to in the first place, navigation school. And we had a great crew and that I met with after graduation from navigation school, and we really all liked each other very well. And I flew 13 missions with them, and then the first mission that I didn't fly with them, they just got all shot up and crash landed in Brussels on their way home. And I told the navigator who had taken my job that I had nursed those boys through thick and thin and took care of them every step of the way. And the first time I turned them over to you, you let them get all shot up. My crew was shot up in such bad state of repair that they gave them the usual flak leave, and they allowed me to go with them, which was the last time I really was with them, except spending the night in the same barracks. I guess I had about as uneventful a career as most anybody. One of the most harrowing experiences I had was on our very first mission, which we really didn't even complete, but we got credit for a mission. We had been assigned the mission to go to Munich, and by the time we got as far as the Zeider Z, we had lost an engine, and we couldn't keep up. We had a load of incendiary bombs, I remember, and coming back across the channel, the rest of us didn't get in on the decision, but the pilot and the co-pilot discussed whether they ought to try to take those bombs back to England, and their conclusion was that we owe it to them. If we can't drop the bombs in Germany, we ought to take them back and let them be used another time. So as we descended, and we were losing part of the altitude because we, without one engine that didn't do too well, so we were losing altitude, and by the time we got back to the coast of England, we really had to hurry on in straight to our base and fly straight in. And just about the time we got to the traffic pattern at our base, the bombardier hollered on the interphone that he hadn't put the pins back in the bombs. So we were about to land with a load of incendiary bombs that were armed and ready to explode. Well, he went back to the bomb bay, and as fast as he could was putting them in. He had about half of them in when we had to touch down. We just stayed aloft as long as we could, and if the pilot had let that plane bounce 6 inches, it probably would have exploded the bombs, but he didn't. He greased it in, and we made it. And one other occasion that I might tell you about was a similar thing. On Christmas Eve of '44, and it was toward the end of my missions, and I was flying with the lead crew, and we had as co-pilot a young man who was just getting his first mission, I believe, and he certainly had no combat experience to speak of. And when we came back, our base was socked in, so they diverted us finally to a fighter base down at Bury St. Edmunds. And this fighter base had metal strip runways, and the fog was coming in so bad that they were really fighting the controls to try to slip that plane in before the fog just completely shut off their vision. And both pilots were working to try to see as much as they could and get that plane down. And what they forgot to do was put the wheels down. So we landed on that metal strip, and the bombardier and I and the DR navigator, the assistant navigator, were all in the nose. We had gotten where we didn't bother to get to a safe place to land, and we were landing in the nose. And all of a sudden, all the sparks and rackets you ever heard cut loose, and we finally skidded to a stop, and those sparks didn't set us afire, but if we'd had any gasoline, they probably would have. One mission that I shall never forget, we were leading the whole task force on a mission to Cologne to hit the marshalling yards at Cologne. And in Cologne, the cathedral is right on the bank of the river. And across the street from the cathedral is the railroad station, and behind that the marshalling yards spread down the river. And so we were to hit the marshalling yards, and it looked like by the time we got to the coast of Europe that it was going to be the clouds the clouds would be completely covering the target. So we had planned to use radar and just try to hit the center of the city, hoping that we might get a few bombs on the marshalling yards by doing that. But on the bomb run, our bombardier, Rosen, hollered on the intercom, "I see the cathedral." So we aimed at it. And we didn't hit the cathedral, we missed. But we did hit the marshalling yards. And we did so well that we got a special commendation from the wing for the mission. And I've always had a fondness for that cathedral ever since. In 1982, my wife and I were in Amsterdam for a week, and we decided to catch the train and go down to Cologne and see the cathedral that I had tried to bomb. And it's a beautiful cathedral. It sits up high on a bluff above the river, and as we came into the station on the train, we could see the cathedral coming into view. We got out of the train and out of the train station and walked across the street and into the cathedral. And it was not damaged in the war. Somebody said that there were a few bomb fragments that may have hit and knocked off a little piece of stone or something, but it was largely undamaged. I've been thankful for that ever since, that we didn't hit that cathedral. It only took about 600 years to build, and it's one of the biggest and finest in Europe, and we Americans aimed at it but missed. I just would like to say that I didn't have a very illustrious career in the 8th Air Force. I didn't have anything bad happen to me. Nobody on my crew was seriously wounded, and made it through without having too much difficulty at all. But I flew with some of the greatest people in the world, and I'm still very close to the members of my original crew, 3 of whom have died. But it has been a great thing in my life to have known the people of the 8th Air Force and to think that I was a part of such a great organization.
My name is Homer King. I'm from Natchez, Mississippi. I went into the service in July of 1943, and I spent my earlier days taking basic training at Gulfport Airfield in Gulfport, Mississippi. I finished there in the fall and entered the Quartermaster Training School on detached service at Camp Lee, Virginia. At that time, we had no schools for training people in my particular field, and so we learned it the Quartermaster way. And I completed that school in December. And the early part of January of '44, I was sent to San Antonio to Kelly Field. And where I was informed that we were in a so-called hot squadron, and everything that we did was censored, and everything that we handled was hush-hush. And we stayed there for a while, and I first was issued all khaki-like clothing, and we were preparing in our thoughts and minds that we were going to the South Pacific. And then one morning at about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, they called all of us out, and we turned all of that kind of clothing, some mosquito netting and what have you, turned it in, and we were issued heavy underwear, overcoats, the like for winter service. And we're not told where we were going. We were about 8 or 9 o'clock that morning. We fell out and marched ourselves to a troop train, and we went up to the central part of the United States and ended up at Camp Kilmer for overseas duty. We arrived in Scotland, in Greenock, Scotland, on the Queen Elizabeth, and we were fully equipped with all of our equipment, and I had ammo and gun, and we were expecting to go in fighting, and we get off the streets, and people were walking just like they did back in the States, and we felt like complete fools. But we soon found out that that was only temporary. We boarded a train, which was blacked out, and told not to take and do certain things, and given instructions as to how we should keep ourselves alert. And we left and arrived at a place called Stone, which was in central England, upper Midlands, at which place we had a tech number that we operated under, our qualification numbers. And we operate on the Bradley plan, so-called, and whenever they need a spec number of our type, they pulled us out and we fell in at certain bases that were already in operation. I fell into that because mine was a tech supply qualification, and I was called to go to a base, which I knew nothing about, but the first stopover was a place called Eccles Road. It was a depot that was being erected. Quonset huts were up. The barrel part of it was up, had concrete flooring, but no ends in them. And we were issued, temporarily we issued sleeping bags, in which we stayed in those and had mud, I'll say ankle deep. And from there, we ate out of a field kitchen, mud and all. And a few days later, they were pulled out by 2s, 3s, what have you, and we went to different bases. And I went to the 445th Bomb Group, attached to it with a sub-depot group there, and got some training in POD, paints, oils, and dopes. I remained there for about a month, and I was sent as a cadreman to what became the 490th Bomb Group at a place called England. And there were about 38 of us. The base was being completed by some Negro battalions of construction people. They had white officers, and we were assigned to eat with them some of the finest food we had. And we started setting up the tech site and putting together the various shops and things that we had. Our duties were primarily to do third echelon work. And we consist, our group, our organization, 477th, was made up of an engineering portion and a supply portion division. My job ended up being assistant to the chief clerk, My job was more or less handling the inventories and issuing it and receiving merchandise of the type that we needed first with B-24s, and then the group made a transition to B-17s, and then we had to take all the material we had for 24s, ship it out, and receive all the materials we needed for 17s. So an average day may consist of our being a service squadron, may consist of our being on guard overnight. We make it usually got a week of night KP, all ranks worked in the kitchens. Ironically, we found that our base had 2 bathtubs. One was in the CO's quarters, and the other one was in the kitchen. We filled it up about 4 times each night, peeled potatoes. There was times when we had heavy casualties of ships. There were heavy damages where we had to take and work as long as we could, and as long as parts and so forth were available. We had a big hangar. We had all the heavy equipment to handle those ships and so forth. Most of it was with us. And we made wing changes, stabilizer changes, engine changes, etc. And it consisted of people who were trained for that particular purpose. Most of our work was at times there was no work. In other words, if everything went smooth and we didn't have any damaged ships, we enjoyed the scenery and meeting the English people. But when we did have damaged ships and the casualties were there, we were not permitted passes or a time away from the base. We were a pretty close-knit outfit. We were not as large as, in some respects, as squadrons in the group, but we all worked at jobs that we've been trained for. We also, for instance, handled the receipt of gasolines from the English. Our outfit would notify them at a certain time of the day what we had on hand and what our needs were, projected needs were going to be for the next day's mission. And that gasoline would come to us through British lorries and pump it into our dumps, and then we would take our equipment and take it out to the aircraft and load it. We received all of our paints, oils, and dopes through the RAF, so we had people who worked with the RAF to secure that material. There was certain equipment, such as communication equipment, that was pertinent to the British, and were in our ships, and we got that through them. There was just a feeling about our part being there was that if we fell down on the job, then of course we affected the whole group. So most of us were very careful about what we did. We tried to do our jobs as best as we knew how, hoping that what we did would keep our boys coming back. I did that for the 477th, and then they reorganized in the late part of 44, early part of 45 to a 417th service group, and I was in the 677th Air Materiel Squadron. That's the way we operated until the end of the war. We were then at that time, those men in our groups who had certain points were transferred into units that they thought were going to stay in England. Those of us who didn't quite have that number of points, we were taken out, and we didn't know then, but later on, after we shipped all of our TAT material to Okinawa, we found out that we were going to get 30 days in the States, and we were en route from Cardiff, Wales, just the party to come to the States for 30 days and from there to Okinawa. And they dropped a big one on Hiroshima. There's no romance in what we did, but we felt like that our jobs were important. We tried to do the best of our ability, and our groups did well. My group was very fortunate to have one of the lowest casualty rates, and our ships were minimum loss. So I'm very proud to be a part of the 8th Air Force.
My name is William Fillmore, nicknamed Phil McGuire. I volunteered to be drafted. That's an unusual thing. I went to the draft board and I volunteered to be drafted. Ended up in the Air Corps. I did not volunteer to go in the Air Corps. I just went through the induction center. I had been to a radio school and they were going to make a radio repairman out of me. Nothing about gunnery school. I heard about being a gunner, so I volunteered to be a gunner and ended up, after going through training, as an armorer gunner in the 388th Bomb Group, and I flew the ball turret. I flew in March, April, and May of 1944, and I flew the ball turret, I think I said that, and I flew 25 missions. Got some undeserved medals, like 4 air medals and the Distinguished Flying Cross. And we had wounded on the plane, but I was never wounded myself. However, one day my oxygen was shot out, and my waist gunner discovered that I wasn't being very active in the ball, so he rolled me up manually, and I'd passed out, and he revived me. And that's the nearest I came to ever having not made it through my missions. The ball turret itself was a very unique turret in that when you got into the ball and closed the door and moved it about 2 inches, you could not open the door. So therefore you were pretty well trapped in. And this was really my fear during the war, because I didn't worry about getting hit myself, but I worried about getting out of the ball in case something happened to the plane. They issued me a chute. I wore my harness, and they issued me a chute, and I would take my chute, and knowing that if the plane went down, tumbling or something like that, I could never find my chute if I could get out of the ball. So I would take the chute and tie it with a cord or whatever I had available in one position on every mission. I'd tie a bow knot, and then on the end of the rope I would tie a handkerchief, so if I could get to my chute, I could find my handkerchief, untie the knot, and I was going to jump out of the plane with the chute in my hand. We were under, of the 25 missions I flew, my plane name, by the way, was Patty Joe. And of the 25 missions we flew, I think we flew Patty Joe about 12 times, because she'd get shot up pretty badly and we'd had to fly another plane on those other 13 missions or so. I never ever, even though we were under fighter attack 7 times, I think, I don't remember, on 7 missions, I never did get a good shot, because flying the ball, you're under the plane and no enemy fighter is going to climb up under the plane because the closure is too slow. And they are dead meat because the ball turret was very accurate. And the 50 caliber, the shooting out of it was very accurate. So they would zoom down by me, and I would try very desperately to get a shot off, and with no success. I would fire, but I would always be behind or in front or whatever. I've had them come so close to me that on one particular time, I remember, he came so close that I could hear him firing his 20mm cannon as he went by me. On another occasion, I remember I could see him so well see his silhouette, see his oxygen mask, and the whole bit. Now, to describe the ball turret was a complete sphere, and it was 36 inches across. And the reason you could not wear your chute or your flak suit in it, you just didn't have room. Within that ball, you had 250 caliber machine guns, all of your ammunition. You had you had hoses coming to you from your oxygen equipment, which was up above you. You had the drive mechanism that drove it both. The zenith and azimuth both you had a pretty complicated driving mechanism. You had a method of cranking the ball up in case your power went out. And on missions, I would, when we like over England or over the Channel, I would cut my power and practice rolling the turret up, because you had to have the guns pointing straight down to escape from the ball. I had two excellent waist gunners who kept an eye on me, and this is how they detected that I'd passed out from lack of oxygen on this particular mission. I'm not saying this is the way it was, but I've been told that a lot of ball turret gunners would ride up in the waist with a flak suit and a parachute on, and only get into the ball when they were needed. But my job, I was an armorer gunner. I'd gone to armament school back in the States. And my job first was to pull the cotter pins out of the bombs. The bombs had a little propeller on the back of them, and unless the propeller had completely unscrewed, the bombs would not detonate when they hit the ground. So you'd remove this cotter pin, and as the bombs would fall, the propeller would turn and unscrew, actually leave the bomb, and then it was armed. And so my first job after we took off, and I would do this almost immediately when we were airborne, I would remove the cotter pins, and then I would get into my maul, because I had heard these dreadful tales that the Germans would come in and attack you when you were in formation, forming your formation. And then I would stay in the ball until I came back, and missions were 10, 11 hours long, a lot of them. And I would stay in my turret until we came back over the base, and then I would get out of my turret. And for that reason, my pilot thought I was a pretty good ball turret gunner, because he could see all those others. He could see all those others.
What was it like? How were you sitting in there?
I was sitting in a sort of a fetal position, lying on my back. When you first got in, you were very uncomfortable, but then you'd roll the turret back and you'd rest on your lower back in your seat. And your 250 calibers, one was down each leg, and you look between your legs towards the target. That's right. And I have been so scared that I shook on several occasions. But yet, even, this is an amazing thing, I'm sure that other men had the same experience. You're still able to do what you're supposed to do, even though you're shaking. And you're afraid. One unique thing about me, I was a very religious boy, but and I knew my mother and my girlfriend was praying for me. But I knew too that German and that fighter, his mother and his girlfriend were praying for him too. So it was a rather unique thing. I don't think I ever fired in anger. I fired in desperation. I fired in frustration. I fired to knock him down if I could, but I never really was mad at the Germans for some reason. That was an unusual feeling, I'm sure, but this is the way I felt. You know, one day we came back from a mission, and the plane was pretty badly shot up, and I was bragging that ball turret had a magic aura, that it couldn't get hit. And one of the ground crew showed me that it had a big gash in it where a piece of flak had hit it, and it luckily hit in a heavy place so that it wouldn't have gone through the turret had it missed that. If it had missed that heavy place, it would have come through the turret. When you were under fighter attack, you were busy, and you had no time for really, you were so busy you couldn't be afraid. You were afraid, but you couldn't show you were afraid. But when you were riding that thing and flak was all over the sky, it was rather, you know, a horrible experience. It really was for not only me but for other men in the plane. My most memorable mission was the first time we caught fighters. We had, even though there were 51s in England when I flew, I don't remember ever having seeing 51s as escort. My pilot, when the 47s and 38s would fly with us, they were, with the limited gas mileage, they would fly just so far and then they'd turn around and go home. That's all they could do. And we weren't afraid of fighter attack when we had our fighter cover. And every time the fighters would leave us, my pilot would call to the crew and tell us to watch out for fighters because our cover was leaving us. And on the first time we caught fighters, the pilot said the same thing. The tail gunner said, oh no, a few minutes later, tail gunner said, sir, you're wrong, we have plenty of fighters up there. And the pilot said, oh no, they're not friendly fighters, they are enemy, they are bandits or whatever we call them. And the tail gunner said, oh, they're friendly, they're blinking their lights at us. So the pilot said, blink back at them. So we realized then, so we were under fighter attack just all day that day, and that was really my most memorable. We were hit by, I think, everything the German Air Force had. In fact, we were told, I don't remember this particularly, but my crew says that we even had Stuka dive bombers fly along, not to attack us, but to fly along with us, apparently to radio our position and altitude and so forth, and direction we were going to the ground. So we were hit by 109s and 190s, and I know Ju-88s because my tail gunner shot down a Ju-88 that day. Okay, that's my most memorable mission. I've been asked several times to describe how it was to fly a mission. And I tell everybody it was complete boredom and complete fear. And boredom because you fly along with nothing to do but sit in that turret, and you couldn't see much. You were so high, you were 20,000 feet up. But then you had total fear because you were afraid something would happen at any minute. And that was the way I felt I guess on every mission, because it was total fear and total boredom, total boredom. Before the mission, we were issued an escape kit, which was a common thing. And I had a scarf that was 2-ply. And I had cut halfway through, I'd cut through 1 ply, and I wore them around my neck as saddlebags, and I'd carry candy bars or whatever in one side and my escape kit in the other side. And we had heating flight equipment, and it was very, very cold in the ball. It was so cold and so windy, you know, because it had holes in it. And the chutes that the spent projectiles, spent shells came out of, wind would just blow through it. Just, you can imagine the force of the wind that came through. And even though I would turn my suit to its highest heat, I would still be very, very cold. I'd have that scarf around my neck, and then I wore a heavy, heavy towel around my neck too. And I have flown when I would beat my hands on my legs and beat my hands together to stay warm. Because it really, really, it would like, they would tell me it was like 50 degrees below zero, you know, when we were flying. And that cold 50-degree wind was pretty awesome. We were afraid of, we were so afraid when we had contrail. We were so afraid of contrails. We were constantly on the lookout for fighters. We were constantly on the lookout for flak. And an awesome sight was to approach a target. And like Berlin, which we were on the second raid to Berlin, and they had like 1,600 flak guns, and I understand they could shoot possibly 5 rounds per minute. And we would be on the bomb run for about 15 minutes, so you can imagine how many rounds of ammunition they would put up in that 10 or 15 minutes that you were on the bomb run. And they would throw up this wall of flak before our planes would get there, and we would know we'd have to fly through it. And that was a pretty awesome experience too.
My name is Bill Turcott. I'm from Richland, Mississippi. I'm enlisted in the Air Force in 1942 and was classified as a navigator and went through pre-flight at Ellington Field. From there I went on to Hondo for advanced navigation training in Texas, and at San Antonio, out from San Antonio, and from there to Blythe, California for my first phase, and Walla Walla, Washington, second phase training. From there we went to Grand Island for overseas staging, and then flew on up to Bangor, Maine, and up by Goose Bay, directly over to Iceland. Spent the night there on July the 4th of 1942. Or 43, I meant to say. And we were landing at Prestwick, Scotland, the next day. And from there on down to Bovington for a reception center there and a brief training in ditching procedure and so forth. And then assignment to the 91st Bomb Group at Bassingbourn, which is about 10 miles southwest of Cambridge. My first mission was to fly with a new crew that we had not flown with before. My original bombardier and myself were assigned to this new air crew as a spare ship, and we were supposed to fill any position that might have been aborted in our group. Well, none of our group aborted, and this pilot, who had about 5 missions and was an eager type, he decided and pulled into formation with another group which was briefed to go to Hanover, bomb a synthetic rubber plant. Whereby we were briefed, our group was briefed to go to Hamburg. As a result, we ran out of gas over the North Sea and had to ditch on this first mission of mine. And wound up successfully ditching in the North Sea. Unfortunately, the sea was fairly calm when we ditched, and all of our people got out, got into dinghies, and were sitting out there waiting. 2 Spitfires came over and circused us, and then 2 little single engine walruses appeared, pusher type amphibians. They call them shag bats. But anyhow, an old converted Lockheed Hudson, they call them Ansons, dropped a big dinghy, and it landed right between our two dinghies. So we paddled over it and it tied up, and about that time the walruses were taxiing up to us. So 5 of us got into one and 5 of us into the other. And we never saw the other walrus again, but found out later that they had to taxi all the way, nearly all the way to the coast, about 40 miles from England, which we had to do the same. We tried to take off. Sea had begun to whitecap, and we didn't make it on our first run. And on the second run, the pilot tried to ride the crest of a trough in the sea there, and it wasn't successful. He plowed head first into the to the water, and the water came over, of course, all over us, like we were sunk, you know. But it broke his horizontal stabilizer on the rear of the little plane there, so we had no alternative but to taxi, which we did until early in the next morning. The motor launch picked us up and carried us on in. So that was a memorable experience, you might say, too. And of course, the other one, in addition to some of the rough missions like Schweinfurt and Bremen and Stuttgart, Frankfurt over Germany, when we had no fighter escort, they were memorable too. And we had some narrow escapes or barely made it back on several of those missions. But the last mission I flew was number 14, which was to bomb a small fighter assembly plant the Germans had at Anklam. That was on October the 9th of 43 when I was shot down. But anyhow, we were on the IP. We had crossed Denmark and gone along over the Baltic Sea, and then we turned directly on heading to Berlin. And Berlin was unthought of as a bombing target at that time. But anyhow, we got about 60 kilometers north of Berlin and turned on our IP, and that's where we got hit by twin-engine fighters firing rockets into our formation, and one exploded and set our number 4 engine on fire. The next thing I knew, we were out of formation, and I heard a lot of conversation up in the cockpit. They were trying to feather the engine, which they were not able to do. The next thing, there was an explosion in the cockpit right at the co-pilot's foot. It boogered his foot and ankle up real bad, and knocked out or damaged the hydraulic system. So when I heard all this commotion, I went through the crawl space and stood up behind the pilot's seat, and he was hollering, "Get out, get out." And the engineer had already helped the co-pilot out of his seat, and the bomb bay doors had been opened, and he managed to get the co-pilot out. I went back down through the crawl space, and then going back and forth, I had got my hair and my jacket all soaked in hydraulic fluid. But anyhow, the bombardier was on his first mission, and he was sitting up there and barely knew what to do. In fact, he didn't even know what was going on because he was getting ready, you know, on a bomb run, toggling bombs. But we had already pulled out of formation. Anyhow, I tapped him on the shoulder and I said, the pilot said for us to get gone, get out. And that's what we did. 6 of our aircrew were not as fortunate as 4 of us. They did not survive. They went down out of control and crashed. We lost our co-pilot and all of the men in the rear except the engineer, and our first pilot, Alex Stewart, was still at the controls when it went out of control and crashed somewhere near the German air base at New Brandenburg. I landed in a open field in a rutabaga patch. There's an old lady out there pulling up rutabaga, and I landed about 20, 30 feet from her. It scared her half to death, but that ended my most memorable and last mission. From there on, I was a POW at Stalag Luft 3, which is in the western edge of Poland in the South Compound, for about 15 months. And we were ordered on 30 minutes notice to fall out and prepare to evacuate our compound about 8:30 one night on the 27th of January. And there was a terrible blizzard going on, and the temperature was way down below zero, and a snowstorm, and we marched out in the column of fours, and over several days we traveled about 70 miles and wound up getting put on boxcars. Of course, the Germans were evacuating us ahead of the Russians. And they also were evacuating the other Air Force POW camps and marching in westward to keep the Russians from getting us. And when we left the compound there, we could hear the artillery on the front already. But anyhow, after several days, loaded about 50 to the boxcar, we finally got down to Stalag 7A, which was a hellhole compared to where we had been. And we were there about a little over 3 months, and were finally liberated by the 14th Armored Division on the 29th of April of 1945. Of course, there was a lot of jubilation there. This 14th Armored Division, they call themselves the Liberators, and they actually were, because they liberated not only our camp, but a lot of others that the Germans had moved down there. There were about 110,000 military prisoners in this one camp, and it's almost unimaginable how crowded conditions and how terrible and unsanitary and everything they were. We were 400 men crowded in our long barracks. It had the windows no windows, no heat or anything. Mud everywhere, and our latrines, our aborts, they call them, overflowing. And you can imagine the jubilation of all those people being liberated there at the same time. It was a very memorable experience. 14th Armored Division was attached to, of the 7th Army, was attached to General Patton's 3rd Army. And after a couple of days, General Patton and this other general came in our compound on a tank. Of course, he had his old shellacked helmet on and his pearl handle revolvers, and that caused quite a bit of commotion too. But I was fortunate enough, Dorothy, my wife, and I made a return visit on a tour of Germany, and 50 years later. We went back to these old compounds, locations. Stalag Luft 3 is now in a pine forest about 40, 50 years old. There's hardly anything left there that you can see except some old brick pillars and a concrete slab here and there. Everything else had been salvaged. Stalag 7A at Moosburg has been taken in by new residential development from the town. And there was nothing there except a small green square with a weeping willow tree in the middle of it, and the French POWs that had been there during the war had erected a monument, a marker there on this square, surrounded by homes in a new subdivision. And we had a memorial service there exactly 50 years to the day and hour that we were liberated in 1995, 29th of April. And we were also fortunate enough to have 10-day stopover to visit with our friends in London who have a townhouse there, and we had met previously on our tour back to England. They had made arrangements for us to see and participate in all of the VE Day celebrations in Hyde Park at London. they had got us a seat in the veterans section right next to the VIP reviewing stand, and we got to see all of their performance from start to finish over several days, and saw all the flowers on the opening day, Saturday. Once in a lifetime experience to be able to return there, and the final show was very impressive. The Queen walked out of the reviewing stand out on the parade field in front there, and they had a small platform built up about 6 or 8 feet that everybody could see. And at least 100,000 people there, mostly standing room only. And she went out there, and the appointed time, I don't remember what time it was, she pressed a button and it lit a great big gas fire. They call it a beacon. And simultaneously, all over England, there were 2,000 beacons or bonfires lit everywhere, you know. And that was most impressive, and as follow-up, biggest fireworks show I ever saw. But being an old 8th Air Force veteran, I don't know, those people over there appreciate us a lot more than it seems we are appreciated or even known about over here.
My name is Eugene Spearman. I flew in the 8th Air Force in World War II. I was a radio operator. I flew 34 missions over Germany. I got credit for an extra mission because we flew lead planes some. I went in service at Keesler Air Force Base, took my basics there. I went in as a cadet, or hopefully as a cadet, but at the time I went in, they had a lot of pilots, kind of extra number of pilots at that time, and I ended up going to radio school in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. After radio school, I went down to Yuma, Arizona, where I took gunnery training, and from there we went to Avon Park, Florida, where we met the crew. Now the crew was a diverse group. We were to fly B-17s, Flying Fortress. My pilot was from Washington State. A co-pilot was Oregon. Bombardier was Staten Island, New York. Navigator was Rhode Island. Top turret gunner was from Pennsylvania. Waist gunner from Kentucky. Ball turret gunner from New Jersey. And the tail gunner was from Passaic, from Okmulgee, Oklahoma. We trained at Avon Park for a few months and then went up to Savannah to Hunter Field, picked up a new B-17 and flew it through Goose Bay and by way of Iceland into England. Well, as we took off, loaded with sea rations from the airfield in Goose Bay, it was the middle of winter, and we were extremely loaded, and as we took off down the runway, the wingtip hit the snowbank there, and we made it into the air, but we had to land again and check the damage that was done to the plane. A few days later, we took off again and went to Iceland. At Iceland, there wasn't any trees on that island, I don't think at all, but anyway, our plane was parked out by the ocean. It was extremely cold and rocky, and I had to, as one of the ones that was appointed to guard the airplane, and it was an extremely cold night. But I was glad that when the night was over and we flew on down to Prestwick, Scotland. At Prestwick, we turned in our airplane and boarded trucks and jeeps and went down to Stone, England, which was a distribution center, I guess you'd say, for personnel. A few days later, we were sent to the base 106, which was at Grafton Underwood at Kettering, England, which is near Northampton. And there we flew real often, almost every day, until I completed my tour of missions. We had some missions that were not as hard as those. One of the first ones we went on was to Dresden, Germany, which was deep inside Germany. And there we almost were shot down. But one of the worst missions was over Bremen, Germany. Now we hit towns like Berlin and Nuremberg and Essen and Duisburg and Hamburg, and of course Dresden, as well as numerous other large towns in Germany. But at Bremen, while attacked in the submarine pens there, we were hit extremely hard by flak, and part of the crew was killed there. But luckily I was not injured in that raid. We made it back with 2 engines out and down on the deck, flying across eastern Germany. I finished my tour just before World War II ended in Europe, and returned to the United States. But on our return flight to the United States, the pilot, of course, was flying, and I was back in the radio room, and other members of the crew and some others that was with us were in the plane. All of a sudden, the plane began to dip up and down, and I thought, well, here I've completed a tour of missions, and I'm going to lose my life almost back to the United States. When I made my way up to the pilot's compartment, they were laughing and said that we have sighted the good old USA. So I was proud that that was the only problem that we had. They were just celebrating, but they didn't let me in on the celebration, and it scared me pretty good right inside of the United States there. I guess that's about the only thing I have that would could tell you about the trip. But I will say this: if you in our barracks there, when I first got there, I had a good friend that had almost completed his tour of missions. In fact, when he completed the tour, normally at the debriefing, they'd have little glasses of cognac, and so we would all, when someone completed their 35 missions at that time, we would pour our cognac in his glass and celebrate with him. Well, this particular boy was supposedly completing his mission, and he was celebrating. We poured our cognac in his glass and celebrated. The next morning, they beat on his bunk and said, "You fly one more mission. Our records show that you need to fly one more mission." And he was so shook up over it that he refused to fly, and they put him on AWOL. And after that, I would see him picking up garbage there on the base, and I kind of could sympathize with him, because I believe that he felt like that next mission would be the one that ended his life. I never did know exactly what did happen to him, but the last I saw him, he was still picking up garbage around the base there. But, thank you. Yeah.
My name is George Harden. I grew up in Clarksdale, Mississippi. Went through all school there. Then I went to Mississippi State. I was there 2.5 years when the war came, and I enlisted in the Air Force, and then went to Camp Shelby, was inducted into the service, and then went to Keesler Field, went to airplane mechanic school, then to Michigan, Ypsilanti, Michigan, to B-24 school, then to Harlingen, Texas, to Air Gunnery School. Then I was sent out to Salt Lake City in a pool, and from there, that was a staging place. Went to Alamogordo, New Mexico, and got in a bomber crew, and we started our phase training. And then after that, we went overseas. We flew the southern route, went to South America and across to Africa and up to England. I was in the 466 bomb group. We arrived in England in March of 1944. We were very fortunate in that we were assigned a base that the English had been on, and everything was in good order. It was a real nice base. We thought, I did personally, much nicer and all than some of the ones that I visited, some of my buddies on other bases. And that 466 was in operation from March of 44 to September of 45. During that time, they flew 231 missions. We had 333 killed in action. We had 171 taken prisoner of war. We had 27 interned. We had 8 that evaded. We lost 42 B-24 airplanes. During the time that I was there, I don't know how many the total loss of planes was after I left. I never could find that figure. The one mission that stands out in my mind, because most of them were more or less uneventful other than flak. Flak always worried us. Of course, fighters was a problem sometime, but you had a different feeling. I did. When you were attacked by fighters, you could shoot back. And that's flak. You couldn't shoot back. You were helpless. And they always said, the shot that hit you, you didn't see it. But anyway, this time we went to Leipzig, to an oil refinery. We were on the bomb run, and we got hit with flak and lost an engine. Shortly then, we slipped out of our formation position and were more or less alone, and just a little bit then, when we were completely alone, ME-109 came in and attacked us. And the pilot and co-pilot went into a diversion, doing an evasive action, and dodged him and swirled around there, and we got by him pretty good. And then we got out alone again, and in the meantime, I had transferred the fuel. I was engineer, top turret gunner, transferred fuel out of that engine that got hit over into some other engine tanks, because the pilot had pushed it pretty much to the limits for all the power we could get to get on home. And when we were out by ourselves again, a group of German fighters came in on us. And we just almost knew that was the end of it, but luckily, after a little while, a group of P-38s came in and ran them off, and we made it on into England and landed. Of course, the pilot did a good job. The side that had the engine knocked out also had the headlight knocked off and flat tire, and he landed with a flat tire, kept us right side up. And as we were sitting on the runway after we landed, waiting on him to come get us, because we were way down on the end of the field. He couldn't taxi it very good with that flat tire, so we just stopped. He pulled off in, cut the engine off, pulled off onto the perimeter, out off the runway. And we were talking about the mission and this, that, and the other, and he brought up that somebody was doing a lot of mumbling on the microphone and he couldn't understand what they were saying, and he'd told them twice to either speak plain or shut up. And he wanted to know what the problem was. So our tail gunner, Bosch, he claimed to be an atheist all these times, and he decided while he was back there that he needed some extra help, so he was trying to pray. And so he told Wheelan, he said, I was praying, he said, Wheelan said, you pray? He said, yeah. He said, I said, Mr. God, or Holy God, or something, you know, said, whoever you are, wherever you are. He said, these other 9 SOBs want to go home, but please take me with you. And of course, we had a big laugh out of that. But anyway, we went on then to the briefing, and that was really about the worst mission that we had as far as combat was concerned. The rest of them were reasonably uneventful, just made them and came on back. And we were, I thought, real lucky. They told us that when we got 25 missions, they would start sending us home. Well, in the meantime, when we found that out, they came out with this point system, and most of us was fairly high with points. But then they come along some scuttlebutt. If you made 5 more missions, you'd get to the top of the list. So Wheelan, our pilot, we talked that over and we decided we'd try that. But in the meantime, we didn't have to do that. Our names came up on the bulletin board to go back to the States. And so we were able to, and I can tell you one more thing. While we were waiting to go back to the States, they moved us out of our barracks because we had a lot of new replacement crews come in, and they wanted to put them up near the headquarters and the mess hall and operations and everything. And so they moved a lot of us out on the perimeter in some of these billets, barracks where the base defense people had been, which they had been transferred somewhere. They might have been sent to the continent. I don't know by then. But anyway, we were out there about 3 or 4 or 5 days. And one night, I believe it was nighttime, a plane was taken off, and either it got shot, caught fire or something on takeoff. Anyway, it crashed. Well, it was dark. And I need to tell you this, the night before, we were a long way from getting any services or the mess hall or anything. Had to catch a caravan to go around to eat and whatever. Well, anyway, I had carried my canteen and filled it full of water, and I also had put some in my cup. And we were in double-decker beds out there, and I put this cup of water up on this shelf. I was in the top bed. And when this explosion happened, well, it shook this little old pasteboard building that just trembled and just almost disappeared. And that water ran down my back. I was laying on my back, and I remember that water running right down the crease of my back, and I thought, oh, Lord. And I saw this blaze through the crack out there, and these guys crying and hollering and going on, and the ammunition popping and whatever. And I thought, well, I made the mission. Now I'm got this far, and I'm hurt. And I'm hurt so bad I can't feel anything. And I thought, Lord, 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 you know, I just couldn't believe. So I started wiggling my toes a little, and then my shoulders, and the water would move down, and I said, oh, well, the feeling's coming back. So I said, I might make it. So I said, well, I'm going to throw the covers off and slide over the side of this bed. Well, I stood up there, and I said, Lord have mercy. Then I started thinking forgot about myself. Those poor guys out there in that plane. But those are the 2 things I remember most.
What was the name of your plane?
The first one that we got shot up with was named Old Mona. I don't know where the pilot or whoever got that name. We never flew that plane again. That article didn't say that It had 27 holes in it, and the hydraulics was shut out. It didn't say that they had to replace all the engines. They assigned us a new plane, which was silver. It had never been camouflaged. At that time, they had started bringing in planes that weren't painted with a camouflage, just had the tail markings for each group on it, and of course the Air Force flag and all on the side. And we never did name it. I think that American people need to respect the American flag and the freedom that we have. We've taken everything for granted. And things have gotten too easy, really, in a lot of ways. We just don't appreciate what we have.
We've truly taken a sentimental journey. Long ago and very far away, you did what had to be done. During a time when all gave some and some gave all, you were there, and I thank you. The B-17s and B-24s will never again assemble into strike formation in the bitter cold of the embattled skies. Never again will the musical thunder of their passage cause the very earth to tremble. But on bleak and lonely nights, ghosts of squadrons take off silently from the whirling mist of the North Sea, from ancient weed-choked runways, and wing away toward the east, never to return. However, each and every day the spirit of the Mighty Eighth is alive and well and eternal. You made that happen. Thanks, guys.